Hello everyone, if you are hearing this, then I actually finished the video. So at this point I'm going to want to give an introduction to the video into how I'm going to do this, or how I'm about to do this, I should say. I am going to take this 60-hour RPG and just follow it along all the way to the end. I mean, it's 40 hours plus like 20 hours post-game. There is gameplay, there is story, but in that story, there's side quests, there's skits, there's all sorts of like enemy variety, and like when do I talk about this? I can't really split it up into sections, I don't think. Especially with something like skits. Like, where do I put skits? At the end? This doesn't make any sense. Unless I just don't talk about them in detail, but I kind of want to. Kind of what I've been planning to do. So I'm going to do that. There's one last thing I want to talk about before we get started, and that's that I recorded my first blind playthrough, you know? So you can understand what it's like going in the first time, which is the main thing. Like, most people aren't going to play this twice like I did. I really enjoyed it, so I played it again. The thing is, the first time, I was already planning to do 2 playthroughs. So I was like, the first time, I'll just record it, in case I want to make a video. And then the second time I'll play it through, then I'll make notes. Yeah, so I made notes on a different playthrough than my original one. Side quests are in different order, I do things in different orders. Hopefully I can get it all straight, but if you notice that I'm talking about something and the footage isn't lining up to what I'm saying, that's why. I bought an external hard drive for this and it didn't have room for 2 playthroughs, unfortunately. Also, the 2 playthroughs I did were on normal difficulty. On top of that, I started a 3rd playthrough on hard, so that I could bring up any significant differences. But normal is the intended difficulty, so that's the most important one. So we start out with an exposition cutscene. Of course we do, it's a JRPG, why am I not surprised? It's actually narrated by Zephyr, who's a character we'll meet later, so that's actually pretty cool. And it's done in a style that none of the rest of the game ever does again. It also doesn't have another exposition cutscene like this either. Basically, classic Tales game, there's 2 worlds, and Renna, bad world that oppresses good world Dana, all started 300 years ago, or so is presented in this cutscene. It introduces the Zooguls, the realms, and specifically Calaglia. It actually doesn't really talk about the other realms that much, which is pretty cool. Not only because it would take too much time, but also because it leaves something for later. When they do start talking about Calaglia though, you realise it's pretty much the worst place imaginable. Slaves, heat, molten rock. Its Lord Balseph is a brute of a guy, comically evil. The whole situation is so comically evil, but it is a pretty metal way to start a game, and it didn't ruin my immersion at all. This game has some rather dark themes, but it's not really that dark. And the contrast can end up quite amusing, but that's a lot of anime to be honest. We move to an in-game cutscene, and then we see a little boy who is a slave pushing a giant barrel. So obviously he can't really push him by himself, so the guard's just gonna hit him, and instead we get introduced to our main character who steps in front of the blow for him. Very quick and easy establishment of, you know, the main character being morally good. It shows his lack of pain right off the bat, even though it gets explained anyway in like a minute. He's introduced as Iron Mask, and well, you can see he's wearing a mask. We'll get onto the significance of this in like a minute. We get put into our first walking section, just kind of feel it out. One thing to note is when you talk to NPCs, they actually have a little tick after you've talked to them, so you know who you've talked to already. Why doesn't every JRPG do this, or every RPG in general? We go to the dock to have our wound looked at, and we get treated to a very exposition-y cutscene. Seriously, just listen to this.
So, still unable to remember anything, I take it?
Blank as always. Nothing but that strange dream.
No face, no memories. Unable to feel pain, yet only too eager to take on everybody else's.
I watched another slave die today. More corpses than I care to count.
Unfortunately, that's hardly a rare sight around these parts.
Danans are always dying, and the Renans just watch. How long can this continue? Why doesn't anyone stand and fight?
There have certainly been uprisings, all right. 3 centuries worth of the damn things. As for all the good they've done, take a look around and judge for yourself.
Doc, back when I knew nothing, you were the one who taught me just how things work around here. You know I'll always be grateful for that, but I can't just...
The race is won by the calm and the steady. You're still young, you have time. Wait for the right moment, both for yourself and the world.
So yeah, our main character is wearing a mask he can't take off, he has no memories and no pain. It's almost cliche, but they lead into like him having absolutely nothing so much that it's kind of interesting. Something good about this cutscene is that the doc is representing the slave's mentality, where they're like, we've got to keep our head down, we're not going to cause any trouble. Whereas Iron Mask is in tune with the player, especially upon seeing this for the first time, you're going to be like, this is awful. So you as the player and Iron Mask are feeling the same thing, and that really helps us step into his shoes in this moment, especially with the opposition that he's already facing. Presenting us with two sides of an argument basically puts us on the main character's side for something that makes us like him and subconsciously relate to him already, even though he has no face or anything. We take a little walk back to our bed, we see general living conditions, how everything is, how oppressive the rule of Calaglia is. It's terrible, people are dying all the time, they use bricks as pillows, you get the picture, it's bad. But the point is, it's pretty seamlessly conveyed in this little walking sequence. We wake up the next morning and then we go to work on the freight train, and then we get our first animated cutscene. Someone stops one of the trains, they check the back, and there's a girl tied up in there. We don't really ever get an explanation as to why she's in this train or where she's going or what the fuck is going on, but anyway, this NPC we don't really care about. Named Zephyr, who is the guy who did the exposition and is the guy leading this operation. He goes in, he touches the girl, and he gets hit by these like weird pseudo-electrical thorn thingies. So it's kind of interesting, gets established early on. The girl runs off, and by the way, this cutscene, all of the animated cutscenes just seem so phoned in. But whatever. Anyway, the girl jumps off and she lands on the same train our main character is working on. The guards are coming after her, and Iron Mask jumps to save her, just doesn't even hesitate, which could be because it's a cute girl, could be because of something that gets revealed way later, but because of the scene with the kid earlier, it's implied that he's just a good guy. That's the only reason, right? Probably, it's kind of unclear. This scene's kind of funny though, because he kicks one of the slaves that's working the train, and also when the soldiers are chasing after them, they're like, I don't know, there's just something funny about these guys in hulking armor using these levers. Anyway, we get a pretty cool fight scene on the train, which is actually quite rare for this game. There's not many of them. And the main character shows off his fighting prowess, which is kind of mysterious right now. But it's not like, oh, he's just good at fighting. It's like, there is a reason. We'll just get to it way later. I mean, he's lost his memory, come on. Zephyr jumps in to help, and he shows off how good of a fighter he is as well. And then they end with a big train explosion. I don't know, it's kind of crazy, but strong start for, you know, a basis of getting these characters together. We see a scene with Balseph where, you know, he's just freaking out. He's a big brute. He's a bad guy. His name's Wild Beast, like that's his nickname. Which a character later says is kind of dumb, but still, like, was that something cooler in Japanese? They also set up another guy, I guess, kind of like hinting to the rest of the world, another lord called Gladymede, which, again, kind of rare. It's hard to explain, it's just kind of weird to have him established this early compared to some of the other characters we'll meet. Iron Mask gets a flash of memory, being unconscious, and then he wakes up, finding himself in the resistance base, which apparently existed this whole time he didn't know, but they knew of him. He's kind of a vigilante of sorts among the slaves, you know, he's a guy in a mask. He's very noticeable, I would say. The resistance have apparently locked up the girl, so of course our main character wants to see what's going on with that. Bit of a connection, I guess. They looked at each other one time, I suppose. We get a little walk around, and we can even talk to this girl and find out all sorts of stuff that doesn't really matter. That's why, you know, it's not an actual cutscene. We find the girl getting interrogated, and there's nothing these guys can do to actually get information out of her, because every time someone touches her, they get electrocuted. Although they could probably just hit her with some, you know, weapons, but I guess they're not that crazy, you know. They're not bad guys, they're the good guys. So they're just gonna, like, I don't know, try and punch her? Like, I don't know what's going on before the scene starts. We get some tidbits of information, including that this girl's name is Zionne Mines, and apparently people who have last names are Renan, and the ones that don't have last names are Danon, and they also have little orbs in their hands. Neither of those two things are particularly relevant, but I guess it's world building. It doesn't really come up in the game as much as I thought it would. Oh, and of course, only Renans can use astral arts, which is just magic. Well, it's like proper magic. Like, other people can use, like, flame fists or whatever, but then there's, like, real magic. Not exactly sure how that works, but whatever. One of the guys there, Nath, is like, wow, it's pretty cool how you've got these thorns and shit. And she's like, no it isn't. No, it isn't cool. She starts getting emotional and the thorns start like fizzing up. Some implications for later. But then the base is getting attacked. Zephyr hands Iron Mask a weapon and Shion gets escorted away. So yeah, there's kind of been like no gameplay really up to this point. And it's 20 something minutes in. But that's fine. So we take another little walk and we find a little item we can pick up, which is, you know, just a little like tutorial thing, showing us that there are items in the world that we can pick up. Then we finally see a knight and we get into our first actual fight. The combat mechanics in this game are absolutely drip-fed, so I will go over them as they come up. At the start here, you basically just have the controls and then the general premise of R1 attacks, which are just basic shitty attacks. Then there are arts, which are attacks that cost that little bar there, those little square things. And obviously, they're generally more powerful just right off the bat, but there's a lot more to it. We'll get to that later. Granted, this first region on the replay was just kind of like, oh, you know what I mean? But still, you know, it's serviceable. You get another fight, this time with a Zugul, which just introduces you to changing targets and all that. Then we meet up with Shion, grab her, and there's this nice little slow-mo that is basically a giant neon sign saying, this is important, this is an important scene, which it kind of is for Shion since nothing like this would have ever happened to her before. But yeah, they fight together and then afterwards we get our first comic book kind of scene. I don't know how you would describe it exactly. But up until this point we've had in-game scenes, some anime scenes, talking to NPCs just in the world. I'm guessing the reason why we hadn't had one up until this point is because only the main characters are in these scenes. Probably something to do with the animations. I don't think NPCs have that many, whereas in these scenes it's sort of like, no, actually you could totally get away with the NPCs being in these cutscenes, they just don't do it for some reason. Anyway, there are two different kinds of scenes where this technique is used. One is skits. The skits from the old days where it was like, you know, 2D not 2D animation, but 2D portraits, that's gone. This is what's replacing it, and it's more dynamic, but I would say there's definitely less personality without the 2D being slid in. It's not like they hate 2D. Like, there's 2D in the game. I don't know why they wouldn't keep that. Regardless, that's what the skits are done in, so I will talk about all the main skits as they come, because skits are optional, so I'll talk about the ones that are important as they come. Some that are tied to like collectibles or anything like that, I'll just leave or maybe mention if they're relevant. I don't know. I'll see how it goes. Anyway, this scene is not a skit, it's what I like to call a forced skit. So it's part of the main story, it's not, you can't avoid it, it's not optional. It's just using the technique of the skits as a regular cutscene instead of, you know, one with actual direction. I don't know which one takes more work, because there's a lot of camera angles and like spacing, but I feel like it's definitely, you know, the actual cutscenes. I mean, the variety's nice, but I would much rather have cutscenes play out normally and then have skits which are 2D and not have this comic book stuff, manga style in the game at all. It's also kind of weird because sometimes they go from right to left and sometimes they go from left to right. I don't know what that is about exactly, but it's not a big deal, it's just interesting. Anyway, this actual forced skit is about them like being like catty and like, oh, we don't like each other because I'm Dan and you're Redden. And then he's like, wait, do you recognize me? And she's like, you're wearing a mask, dude. And don't you worry, I was thinking it the first time I played this game. I was like, is this gonna be some stupid reincarnation bullshit where their past selves knew each other and were in love and it's like this stupid Destiny garbage? No. None of that. Even as we go into the next scene where it seems like that could be it. Not that, not at all. Don't worry. We meet up with Zephyr, we go outside into another animated cutscene. Shion gets fucking murdered, which is important. Remember this for later. Iron Mask goes up to her, and there's a... He pulls a flame sword out of her chest, because she has the fire core, which is like a magic fire thing, and it's inside her body. Don't get too hung up on this, because it's never going to be that well explained. Anyway, he uses the sword, he owns these dudes, and then it's like, oh shit, it's burning up his hands, but it doesn't matter because he doesn't feel pain. But it's also actually getting damaged, and that's kind of bad. Also, as we transition out of the animated cutscene, can we just appreciate that the in-game burns look better than the animated cutscene burns? That's just amazing. Zephyr pulls out is like, oh, he doesn't feel pain. She has this flaming sword. Oh, it's like they belong together. Oh, it's something. And again, this was, to me, I was like, oh no, it's some stupid Destiny thing. But it's not. It's not at all. He's just, this is just, I guess, romance. Like, ooh, these guys really go together kind of thing, maybe. So the three characters group up, and then we get into another force skit, where we kind of get into this, not issue, I don't know if I call it an issue, but it's definitely something that's prevalent throughout, and I think to varying degrees of success, where they feel the need to explain everything that they can physically like get a hold of and be like, we can explain this away in a skit, or, you know, skits are supposed to be like a little fun, but a lot of times it's just like, we gotta talk about the exposition, and this is a force skit, like this has to happen. And they say like, oh, you only hit my master core, like the flames doesn't hurt me because blah blah blah. I get that. I didn't need that explanation. What I would have liked explained is, why is the flaming sword a sword? Why can the master core even do this? How did Zionne actually get it? Like, how did she actually get it? Like, she stole it from Balseph? But I didn't see that. Why didn't they just have it so during the exposition, while it's like, oh, it cuts to the slaves and they're slaving away and talks about the slaves, and then it briefly cuts over to Zionne stealing the master core? Why didn't it just do that? Or something along those lines? Instead, it's just like, yo, I stole the master core and got captured. And then it's like, oh, also these flames, they don't hurt me because they just don't, okay? Like, so what? I don't care. Also, I just want to briefly mention her needing power. She's like, I need power. The flaming sword is power. This is important. Because it's kind of weirdly presented later. It might be a translation thing, but I'll talk about it when we get there, obviously. But basically, she wants power to do what she wants to do, which is very unclear at this point in the game. And for most of it, if I'm being honest. And of course, Iron Mask is like, how could you throw everything away to try and go after power? And then in the end, it's like, oh, you befriended Zionne, which is a little weird, but okay. But that basically means that we can control Zionne now and play as her if we wish. I won't talk about how she plays just yet though, because she hasn't got everything. There's like one other ability she gets in this first region. And now that we're here in Calaglia proper, we can really appreciate how good the graphics are, especially compared to the older Tales games. Although my capture card is pretty shit, so...
That's...
Gladymede Castle, stronghold of Lord Balseph, self-imposed ruler of all Calaglia.
I've never seen it from this close before.
That's it, all right. And next to it are the gates of fire. Take a good long look while you still can. That wall is what we've come to tear down. The only thing standing between us and freedom.
Freedom.
This wall thing gets brought up throughout the game, and it's pretty nicely established here, especially with the actual physical wall, but we will be revisiting this a lot of times. We've run into some more Zoogl's, and this time Zephyr is in the party, and it just tells us about like semi-automatic manual. I didn't really bother changing it, I don't think, throughout either of my playthroughs.
Don't fight any enemies you can otherwise avoid, all right?
Makes sense. If we try to take them all on, there'll be no end in sight. This one's tough, but we have no choice.
Let me know if you need healing.
Is this it?
So in some areas there are some like stronger enemies that you can fight early, I guess, or when you come back to that area you can fight an enemy and still have a challenge, because there is some backtracking in some of the levels. But this didn't really seem to matter most of the time. Like right at the beginning it's like, whoa, this guy's like several levels above you, but then later on it's kind of like, you can kind of like brute force your way through them, and it's really not worth it. Honestly, this concept just feels kind of undercooked. Could have used more work to make, I don't know, maybe more experience, because you really don't get enough experience for the amount of effort you go through, especially later on, and especially in the last like 2 major dungeons, where the game just shits the bed basically.
Let's stop a moment to catch our breath.
But I've barely worked up a sweat.
Speak for yourself. What do you want, a medal?
Do medals even fucking exist in this universe? Camps restore HP and CP, no surprise there. HP, obvious health points. CP is cure points, which is like a new system where any cure magic has its own, basically, MP to draw from. I guess that's so, you know, you don't have to have offensive magic and defensive magic, well, healing magic, as part of the same thing, which seems like a good idea, but, well, we'll get into that later. Next thing to note about camp is that this downloadable content thing, that's always here. That's fun. Love that. There are also these mini conversations, which some of them are quite fluffy, whereas others are pretty interesting and insightful to the story at large. I guess it depends on when you go to camp. Say if you go to camp over and over when you're in the same area, obviously the conversations aren't going to be very new or exciting or relevant to the plot. On top of that, there are also skits that you can play at camp. There are skits you get at the bottom, right, like you do regularly. And then there's like a menu you can draw from, which is Reminisce, where you can look at old skits you may have missed or that you want to watch again. Although if you do that, they'll be in the same clothes they are right at this moment, instead of, you know, the correct clothes. So later, as you may have guessed, the main character loses the mask, but you can still go back to a previous skit with this costume, where he's like, oh, I got this mask on, but he doesn't have the mask on. And it's the same with DLC costumes. They just assume you have the canon outfit on. But the first one of these camp skits is Zephyr's teachings, and I'm just going to let this one play because it's kind of important. So important, in fact, you would think it'd be mandatory viewing, but it is not.
Zephyr, why aren't you concerned about who I am?
You feeling left out, son?
No, it's not that. But
You said you wanted to fight so that you can live a free man. At this point, that's all that matters. Even if it somehow turned out you were a Renin, it wouldn't be such a big deal.
a Renin?
Until we know who you are, we can't rule anything out. Besides, we've already got Zionne with us. At this point, what's one more Renin as long as they're on our side?
So you don't see every Renin as an enemy?
Our goal isn't to hunt down and kill all Renins. We only arm ourselves as much as we need to set ourselves free. If you can believe it, not every Danon agrees with what we're doing either.
Are you saying we have enemies among the Danons?
Not quite. They're just not up for rebelling, per se. The thing you have to remember is that everyone has their own path to walk.
I'm not sure I understand.
That's okay. Just focus on what we have to do right now. However, the time will come when you'll need to decide what to do for yourself.
This skit really establishes Zephyr as a mentor character, and it also starts molding Iron Mask's philosophy throughout the game. So again, very strange that this is optional. It's not like all skits are important, and it's like, oh yeah, you gotta watch all skits because that's canon. Because some of them are clearly not important at all. Some of them are just joke skits. Some of them are tied to side quests. It's really hard to tell which skits are important and which ones don't matter, which is a bit of an issue, I would feel. Because you're really missing out if you're not watching all the skits, but some people might be like, there's a lot of skits. I think there's more than average skits. There's 300 and something. Speaking of which, here comes another skit. Iron Mask's Spirit Call. Iron Mask's... So Iron Mask isn't embedded, and Zionne finds this suspicious. So she asks about it, and I guess Ray Chase just starts acting his little heart out.
I'm not lying if that's what you think. Believe me, I wish I knew who the hell I am. But I don't. It's funny how I didn't have any time for soul searching while digging up rocks in a mine.
Something to note is that the voice acting in this game is generally pretty good, especially when it comes to Ray Chase, which is pretty funny because he was also the protagonist in Final Fantasy 15, and he's also a protagonist here. But he's pretty good at what he does. I think he overacts. Sometimes he'll deliver a line with so much emotion, and you're like, this line does not need this much emotion. It's just not necessary. Just calm down, Ray, okay? But here comes another skit, The Masked Slave. I could have accessed this one a lot earlier, but I missed it until we got to camp, so here we are, I guess. It's just some nice exposition about the mask, and oh, it's so hard to eat, and blah blah blah, all that good stuff. Oh, and also that the slavers are evil, blah blah blah, we get the picture. Okay, finally, the last one, just called Unflinching Iron Mask, even though he even says in the skit that he actually does flinch. Also, how could Zionne say this? What a weird way to start this skit. But basically, Iron Mask is like, whoa, I don't feel pain, which is really good, but I still take the damage. I'm pretty sure the skit just exists for people who didn't really get that he's not immortal or anything. It's just that he can't feel pain. There's also an emphasis put on other people telling him how much damage he's taken, because that's something that he finds it very difficult to understand, really. Not a bad skit. Okay, now we can camp for the night and have the actual cutscene we're supposed to be having right now. This cutscene is mostly exposition, you know, it's just like, oh, you don't remember anything, so I guess I'll have to explain it to you. To summarize, the reason that there are slaves is so they can mine up astral energy and put it into a core, the core that Zionne now has in her chest. Somehow, we didn't see that, but whatever. And each region has its own core, and the person that gets the most astral energy becomes the new ruler, which is called the Sovereign. In this contest called the Crown Contest, I feel like this was very different in the original Japanese and sounded just so ridiculous, if I had to guess. But yeah, like I said, Ray Chase acts his little heart out in this game.
So you see, the Master Cores are the receptacles in which the Lords store their power. And we Danans are sacrificed, so the Renans can choose their new ruler.
That's insane! You're telling me that's what our people have been dying for this whole time?
Relax, hero. You're not the only one who's bent out of shape about the whole thing.
Then they just start bullshitting about Zionne's Master Core and like, oh, why does it take the form of a sword? Oh, I don't know why it takes the form of a sword. I don't know why it takes the form of a sword. And I beat in the fucking game. But what is Zionne's motivation?
I'm going to take down all of the lords.
Never thought I'd say this, but I like the cut of your jib, Renan.
What the actual fuck are you saying? Then finally we get a little hint of what's going on with Zionne, which will take about 20 hours to get to, don't worry. Now we're getting to what I would consider our first proper dungeon. It's not really much of a dungeon, but it's something. It's worth noting that on top of chests and stuff like that, there's also food you can pick up and rocks, crystal things, but I'll talk about them when they actually become relevant. But being pretty much the first dungeon, it does introduce, you know, picking up stuff, but also things like this where you can just drop right off this thing right here into the water. These optional paths have all sorts of rewards and stuff. Nothing crazy usually, but something to keep an eye out for. And some of them better than others, better integrated. Especially when it comes to buildings, they're very boring. But something like this, it's a lot more fun. Not much to this dungeon, of course. It's just a nice little train track thing, whatever. But the game does take the opportunity to introduce us to these special kind of Zeugles. I think they're officially called Gigant or something. I don't think it's ever said out loud. But usually you'll come across one of these guys and then you'll have to come back at like 10 levels later. Or you can really like go for it and try and take it down. But usually it's a bit too tough for you by the time you encounter it. This one is very different from every other one though. It's like level 40 something. Which is like 30 levels above you right now. Well, more like 35. It's so much higher. And I don't know why. I guess it's so you can come back way later and be like, wow, I beat that thing I saw at the beginning of the game, but it's really not that epic. Like, you just see the mantis. It's not like the mantis attacks you or is in a cutscene, and it just felt kind of weird to me. But yeah, there are 20 of these guys. Some of them are quite interesting, and some of them are just like bigger versions of things you've already fought before. But they drop astral flowers, which give you plus 10 CP permanently, which is pretty important because, you know, they're your cure points and all. Each monster has its own side quest associated with it, so it's pretty hard to miss one. It's kind of weird though, because some of them are already in the world, and if you get the side quest after, they'll just be like, oh, you beat it. Side quest done. But some of the side quests spawn the monsters in, so that's kind of confusing. And some of them are unique and some of them not unique. We'll be covering all the side quests as they come, so we will get to all of these monsters and how good they are. But let's talk about another skit. This one's called Reminiscing.
I know I already asked you this, but are you sure we haven't met somewhere before?
Does this skit really need to exist? We briefly mentioned Lenegus, which is the big spaceship regular Renans live on, whereas Renna is where the rest of them live. And we also mentioned that the Crown Contest has been going on for 7 years, and that Alphen has memories for about 1 year back. This is all stuff that gets mentioned later, so I don't know why there's a skip for it. I guess it also reiterates that Iron Mask really recognizes this girl from somewhere, but it doesn't matter. You've got hundreds of skits, cut this one out. Other things to mention about this dungeon is that they've got a few different alternate paths despite being very short. Combat at this point though, especially on the replay, is extremely boring for a while, even as they drip feed you new stuff. You're only fighting armadillos in this first area. You want to know why that is? Because the enemy variety in this game, not super good, but I'll talk about each enemy type as they come up. or I'll talk about each enemy type in each dungeon, since that'll give you a greater impression as to what enemies you're seeing over and over again. We also come across our first owl. Nothing to really say about these guys yet, other than they give you a cosmetic item. Oh, and the voice acting for these owls? Kinda hilarious. Woohoo! But yeah, we finished that dungeon, no boss or anything. We just get out the other side and arrive at Ulzebek. God, these names are not going to be easy to say over and over. And right off the bat, they're like, oh yeah, there's no Renans around here. They're not guarding this area. They don't really care because there's not many Renans, which I know why there aren't many Renans, but like seriously? They're just going to let these guys sit around and build an army? I mean, they underestimate them greatly, they do say that, but it's very weird how there's just a town of people here, especially when this is on the way to the mines. This is basically a crossroads between the mines, the ruins, and the general, like, castle area and everything. How is this not being used? This is a crossroads. The Renans must come through here. Have some secret entrance, have a cave, or I know there's a cave for the next one, but just make it make sense. I know this is such a nitpick, but it's just so blatant. Like, it's so... This is a giant town. It's a giant town. And no Renans have come here? One thing that's pretty good about this game compared to some of the other Tales games is that there's stuff to actually find in the towns. I guess in Symphonia there's like the recipes, but I wanted some chests and stuff. Which there are some. Like, it's not crazy, but there is something to look for. Especially in these big, intricate towns with a lot of copy-paste buildings. Which certainly isn't great, but in Calaglia, it makes a lot of sense why there'd be so many similar structures. Especially in the slave area. Owls are usually found in towns like this as well, so there's always an owl to look for, if nothing else. Kind of like the recipes in Symphonia. Honestly, I've just got PTSD from Symphonia, from just looking around for stuff and then nothing being there. But yeah, we finally meet up with Mrs. Medic Girl and this guy who got shocked. Remember that guy? Yeah. And then Zephyr is just like, oh yeah, we can take down Balseph now. Well, we've got an ace in the hole, no problem. Which is pretty presumptuous of him to both assume that he can trust both of these people and that the flaming sword will be enough. I mean, Balseph's element is fire. So using a fire sword on a fire lord doesn't really seem like a great idea that would work out. I mean, he's powerful. I mean, he barely knows how powerful it is. It just took out some soldiers. Like, they're pretty fucking weak, dude. After that, though, they start talking about clothes and how they need new clothes and put Iron Mask in this, like, blue garb thing. And Shion's like, well, I don't want to, you know, wear some Danon clothes. So you gotta talk to Nath. But first we have to have a skit, which is called Water and Oil. And it's basically more about, oh yeah, totally, they don't expect the slaves to rise up. And they basically use it as a jumping off point to talk about the fact that most of the slaves are just compliant and will not do anything like this, so they don't expect it, but still kind of bullshit. But then we get into a little tangent about how Shion's like, I don't need power, I just need to, you know, use people and whatever, I don't need power at all. Even though, in the previous scene, you know, before the dungeon thing, she totally did need power, she said she needed power, like, what are you talking about, what do you mean? This just completely contradicts that other scene, and I guess they just forgot about it in one of the drafts, or this is a localization error or something, but this skit sucks, basically. Just cut it out. We try to talk to Nath about getting some clothes, but then he tells us to check in with that guy over there. Are all NPCs just people who cannot be named? Like, he gets a name, but yes, we talk to Dyron, and then we have this, like, NPC dialogue thing, which is, I think is to save voice acting or budget or something. All side quests are told this way, but when it's used in the main story, that's when it gets really weird, but we'll get to that. These are kind of boring. You just cut to the character who's speaking, and when dialogue is being spoken, they have that, like, Danganronpa voice line thing. I don't really mind that the side quests are this way. I mean, it's a JRPG after all. I just kind of wish it wasn't. I think Bandai Namco actually did invest a lot into, like, upgrading the game's graphics and trying all this stuff, so maybe the next one, there'll be a bit more voice acting, I don't know. Maybe it's just a time thing, actually. Maybe it's just getting the voice actors in for an appropriate amount of time. They don't want to waste too long on side stuff. We will have to see. Anyway, this is the tutorial side quest. There's 70 side quests in the game. This one is mandatory. All this one is just going back the way you came earlier, so backtracking and triggering a cutscene. We could give them the benefit of the doubt and just say that this is because they want to teach you about respawning enemies, the fact that the rocks grow back, the fact that the food grows back, all that stuff. It's only a short walk anyway. This one was basically about a missing party, and when we find them, they're pretty much dead except for one guy, who then proceeds to die immediately, and Alphen's like,
they've killed so many of us, and it's still not enough! They won't be satisfied until they've wiped us all out like pests!
this really gets downplayed, partially because of the music. The music in this game, like, it's not bad, but it's like they always misuse it. The audio mixing is all over the place sometimes. It's just especially ridiculous in this scene with him saying, "They're gonna wipe us all out like pests!" And then hearing the doo-doo. What are you doing? Like, I wanna, like, this barely registers to me. It's just completely overshadowed by the music that just doesn't fit the scene at all. Immediately after this, by the way, they find out what he used the last of his strength to hide, and it's a fucking cooking pot. It's a single cooking pot. That's it. I get that it's supposed to be like, whoa, it's so harsh, dude. Like, they just died for this cooking pot, but it's just humorous. It's just humorous. Like, you really need the music to sell this kind of scene, and it just doesn't at all. And they're acting super seriously over this music you've heard the entire time you've been walking around, going back to this area.
I guess you think it's stupid getting killed over a silly trinket, huh?
No. Clearly he risked his life for something he believed in. I would never mock someone for that. However, it will be up to us to figure out the purpose behind his dying act.
We'll make sure it wasn't in vain.
Then guess what happens? We go back, and the guy's kid is there. The guy's child is there, like, my daddy's fucking dead. My daddy's fucking dead, and the same music is playing. It's not even voiced. She's like, it's just bizarre. It's just weird. Like, this is not the emotional resonance I should be having right now. AKA, none. It's very clear that whoever applied the music doesn't have a clue what the fuck they're doing. All you had to do was cut the music. It's a serious scene. Just cut the music. That's all you had to do. You just had to make the music go away. We can have a little piece, and then we come back. And that they can't even do that. Like, it's just so weird. Anyway, we complete the quest. We get some gold, which is, you know, currency, and some SP, which gets used in this little title thing. I guess I have to go ahead and explain this now, huh? Okay, so on the skill panel, there are titles. And those titles have 5 different skills attached to them. And you buy them with SP, which it mostly comes from quests and stuff. The SP from enemies is like barely anything, obviously, because that's, you want to get it from quests, that's why you do quests. Quite a few of the titles are tied to side content. This is what this is showing you. You do the quest, you get this title, and then it's like, whoa, look, here's the SP screen. These give you certain stat boosts, some arts, things like that. Nothing too crazy, and it's not like the spear grid from Final Fantasy X or something where it's like each individual stat. It's just some stats that you actually care about. Although some are way better than others. I'll probably talk about this in depth later. Barely have anything on it right now anyway. Oh, but if you get all 5 things for a title, then it'll give you like an actual stat boost of like attack, defense, magic, whatever. It is introduced pretty well through this one side quest where it gives you an ability, so you just force to see it and you're like, oh, I can buy this. Like, it's pretty good. Again, because everything's so spaced out in this game in terms of learning stuff, they can just put 2 screens together every now and again, and you'll read it, it's 2 paragraphs. You'll end up understanding everything pretty well. It just gives you everything step by step, and there's no reason you shouldn't be able to figure this out from what they give you, even if you're not even reading that closely. Since we're already on boring shit when we talk about art customization, where you can switch in different arts into each slot, triangle, square, or X, or whatever platform you're on. You could do for each character, and it's only the menu for when you control them, so you don't need to do it if you're not playing as that character. In that case, they'll just use any art they want. You can also do the same thing from the menus, but it's kind of tedious. It's still kind of tedious, even though you'd think by now they'd really learn to be less tedious. I think it has been in previous installments. I'll also mention the changing menus here. At the start it's just Iron Mask in his slave clothes, and by now it's Iron Mask in his blue garb with Shion. The menu changes definitely peter out towards the end, and some of them are pretty small, but I do appreciate them when they are there. It definitely makes each section feel like its own era, until again towards the end where it just kind of like goes away a little bit, especially when you get all your party members, but it is something to be admired. But hey, here we are on side quest 2, and guess what? It's the most boring side quest you could possibly imagine for this kind of quest. It's just like, yo, we need to kill this monster, and you can do this way later in the game, or you can do this now. So both the start and end have to accommodate for you to be able to do that, which means only Iron Mask and Shion are there, and they can't say anything plot relevant, plot related, anything of any interest to anyone. This quest is so boring in its premise. This is an after effect of the fact that you can do all the quests and none of them are missable. I don't know what to say. Like, would I prefer this quest not to be in the game? No. But it is really boring. The only interesting thing about it that I can say is that at the end of the opening of this, it says, oh yeah, come back when you've got more party members, which is like kind of hinting that you shouldn't take it on yet, but also that you're getting more party members, which is like fun to think about, but like, come on, dude.
Sounds like it was a real ordeal out there. There aren't many of us who can take on those Renin armored soldiers. All we can do is make sure we remember those who sacrificed their lives for the cause.
Yeah, they won't be forgotten.
Glad to hear it. Now, what was that favor you wanted to ask me?
Oh, right. Well, you see...
So Nay finally points us in the direction of getting something new for Zionne to wear, and Zionne seems strangely interested in getting some new clothes.
Those look like the ruins. Let's move.
Are we really going in there?
Yes, now let's move.
A woman who's interested in getting clothes? I don't know, guys, it doesn't seem very realistic. The next skit, Renin Technology, just explains how Zionne can like pull her gun out of nowhere. It's just, she can just do that. And then Iron Mask says this.
That way you don't have to carry around any heavy weapons or worry about enemies trying to steal them, right? It's a pretty cool invention.
You realize you're praising the technology of your enemies, right?
So, technology's technology. It's not good or bad in and of itself.
I guess that's true.
So yeah, good skit. Explained some things that didn't actually make sense and brought up something interesting. So we get into the next combat area and I'm immediately confused. We go back to non-voice dialogue for the boost attacks and I don't understand why. Like, couldn't you have just done this? Especially since if this was voiced, it'd be a bit more impactful with the stuff Zionne is saying. But whatever, the game is explaining boost attacks, so I should too. Each of the 6 characters have their own boost attack, and they all intend to break the enemy, knock them down so they can't do anything for a limited time. Iron Mask's is the best because it just knocks any enemy down. Just any enemy. Whereas everything else is for a specific enemy. For example, Zionne's is for flying enemies only. Get ready to hear these 3 lines over and over, by the way.
Where are you going? This one's mine! This one's mine! Where are you going? I never miss! I never miss!
I believe you get boost attacks faster from combos, but other than that, there's not much to say just yet. You're going to pretty much be using them all the time. And even more towards the end. Because it's just like spam, 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 and you just have more of them, obviously. Because there's more characters. As we move on to start talking about the actual dungeon, I realised that I should probably bring up the names in case I want to refer back to them later. There are certainly some combat areas I don't consider to be dungeons, and my interpretation of a dungeon might not be particularly accurate, but I'm going to call most of the main areas dungeons just for consistency. So the first one was called Sandinus Ravine, that was the tutorial area, and this one is called Igalia Wastes. If the first one was just a very basic dungeon, this one starts getting a bit more complicated, incorporating verticality. There are hills and slopes, there are also some things to climb. Technically the last dungeon had that drop, but it's not really a part of the dungeon like the verticality is in this one, because there's a big like mound in the middle, and around those are like varying elevations that you have to explore in order to find everything. Also, why does Iron Mask make a noise when he falls from a long drop? He doesn't feel pain. Doesn't make any sense. The enemies of this dungeon are the armadillo and golem that we've already seen, but also the bees that Zionne is supposed to take care of, and the wolves. The golems, by the way, I should have talked about this before, but I didn't think it was relevant, not because I forgot or anything. Why doesn't it have the exclamation point skull icons over them when they're too high level for you like the older games? I really have no idea why you would take that out. Like, I just don't have a clue. Like, did they just forget? Anyway, we arrive at camp, a forced skit plays, Iron Mask is hungry, and then we get this.
You should eat whenever you can. The last thing I need is you keeling over in the middle of a fight just because you didn't eat.
Never thought I'd get lectured on eating by a Renin, of all people.
Yeah, well, some of us Renins know what it's like to go without food, believe it or not.
I played through this game twice. I swear this never gets explained. Like, I haven't seen every single skit, because they're very hard to find, they just won't trigger. I don't know where they're missing. So I'm missing like 12 or something, or like 7. And I don't think this ever gets appropriately explained. I know why in my head that could be the case, but it's just weird that it doesn't come up again ever. I guess I'll come back to this when the plausible explanation actually comes up in the story.
What are you staring at me for?
Your clothes are all about function over form. You should think about sprucing them up a little.
Why? What purpose would it serve?
I guess you're right. I just think you'd look good with a little blue thrown in somewhere.
All right, I'll think about it.
It's a Tales game, so of course there's cooking. Each character has their own benefit to cooking if they cook it, but you can also like forego that benefit if it's shit, which a couple of them are. Also, a few of them aren't translated very well. I don't know if this changes or like, I swear some of them I've seen with different translations for the same thing. This one says, consume double ingredients for plus 90% to cooking. What does that mean? To effectiveness? I don't know. You could see how that could be situational if that was effectiveness, but I don't know if it is, because it doesn't say. Honestly, I think there might be some cooking stat I don't know about somewhere. Like, am I crazy? The way it's phrased makes it seem like there's a stat that gets buffed or something. I don't know. Just say effectiveness next time, okay? But yes, they have some porridge as their first meal together.
It would have been perfect if it had any flavor.
Sorry it didn't live up to your palate. You've got me curious now. Is it just pain you can't sense, or are your taste buds shot too?
One time I couldn't get enough of these things I picked off a plant, but everyone else said they were way too spicy. Doc thinks maybe I crave spicy food to compensate for the lack of pain I feel.
Maybe it's best I take charge of the cooking. You know, just to be on the safe side. I can't guarantee it'll be to your tastes, though.
This bickering is very marriage couple-esque, and it's very clearly intentional, and I like it. After this we get a title for Zionne, so you do get titles for kind of innocuous things. This is still mandatory, so... But you know, this is an example for you later. But after actually spending my SP, because the game reminded me, we end up in Fagan ruins. So many people have tried to get in before, and Zionne just waves her hand and she's a Ren, so she's allowed in, so we just walk in.
Easy.
In this dungeon, they introduce something a little bit more complicated. You know, there's a door, and there's a control panel for the door. It barely gets used. I guess it's an early dungeon, so it's just, you know, it's just turning off a switch. It's not complicated, and it's not hard, but what really sets this apart from the first couple of dungeons we've seen is the aesthetic, the ruins. Like, they were all ruins and broken stuff and all that kind of thing, but this one is like sanded in. Everything's broken down. You use your jumps to like get over gaps in this. The little square rooms are throughout this game, and they're just as boring here as they are anywhere else, but they do introduce the little Renin chests, so that's cool. The enemy variety in here is just more armadillos and bees. The armadillos, at least, they have an explanation.
For an abandoned place, sure is crawling with critters. Kinda makes you wonder how they all got in.
Through cracks in the walls, I guess. Maybe it's a good environment for these species to propagate in. Best not to let your guard down either way. Best not to let your guard down either way.
But how did the bees get here? Like, honestly, how did the bees get in here? There's also a skit in here called Mutual Hunger. And pay attention to this clip.
Thinking about it now, I wonder if they've always kept it meager so we would never have the energy to try to resist what they've done to us.
Yeah. An empty stomach takes its toll on the body and the spirit after a while.
How does a Renin like you know what it's like?
I may be Renin, but they don't like me either. I could be squeaky clean and they still wouldn't give me anything.
Didn't we just do this? Isn't this a scene we just had at camp?
You should eat whenever you can. The last thing I need is you keeling over in the middle of a fight just because you didn't eat.
Never thought I'd get lectured on eating by a Renin, of all people.
Yeah, well, some of us Renins know what it's like to go without food, believe it or not.
I'm gonna tell you right now, some of the self-cannibalism in this game is just so ridiculous. And this is just, at least it ends well.
Did your stomach just...
I didn't hear anything.
But you just ate. How are you already...
I said I didn't hear anything.
I still have some I haven't eaten yet. Do you want it?
Sure.
But yes, this is another skit that I think should have been cut. So we get to the end of the dungeon. There's still no boss at any of these dungeons. This isn't like a dungeon, I guess. Zionne finally gets her clothes and, well...
Listen, I get it. You care how you look. But we've got places to...
What is it?
No. Nothing.
Oh my god, he thought she was so beautiful, he was stunned to silence. That's so cliche, bro. Fuck you, man. That was fun. Also in this game, outfits and equipment are separate, and this counts as both, so I actually get a stat boost from the things you just got, as well as an outfit. So that's pretty interesting. On the way out, we get a skit simply called Fagan Ruins, and it's just them talking about whether it was a supply depot or a lord's castle, and how it could have been both, and it's actually really interesting. A lot more interesting than some of the other ones have been.
From what I've heard, a lot of the materials that were initially brought over from Rena 300 years ago were repurposed for other things over time. So it's entirely possible that this place used to be both a supply depot and a lord's castle at different points in time. They're not mutually exclusive.
Other than that, there's not really anything else to talk about until we get back to Ulzebek. Luckily though, the game knows this, so it starts letting us use fast travel. Fast travel is obviously very useful. There are even some really big maps that have more than one fast travel point, but you can only go to that point. And if there's some floors without any point on, you have to like walk through it and it's a whole thing. This gets more common as the game progresses, but it's kind of a nitpick, so who cares. As soon as we get back, we can do another side quest. Unfortunately, this is like the most boring side quest in the game. And I know I said this for the last one too, but they're equally as bad. I guess this one has a bit of world building to it, but still. Not only is it a hand over some food side quest, but the premise is just, hey, you know, we're starving, whatever, give us some food. It's crap. It gives you a recipe, but I'd rather just find it in a chest. What a waste of time. We report back to Zephyr, and apparently there's an attack on Mosgul, which is where we start the game. I could describe the scene, but I think it's better to just show it to you.
Crap!
What?
No way! Damn it!
Just where do you think you're going?
You know where. Mosgul.
What good is it going to do to...
I don't need your permission.
Why the fuck is this an unvoiced scene? They're being massacred. Bastards! What? Why is that not voiced? And then we get right after that conversation is over, and suddenly the emotion starts coming out. The voice actors are allowed to voice act. What was that? What was the point of that? Because there was an NPC in the conversation? Just get a fucking voice actor. It's just baffling that they would just undercut the tension like this. And when you get out of the conversation, that's when they can start building tension. Why weren't you doing that in the previous conversation? Anyway, the next dungeon is Kyrd Garrison, that's where we're going now. This whole dungeon is basically a track that goes and winds through the mountains. There's a fence, there's some water. I do like the combination of the environment and the Renin structures. Everything from the towers to hollowed out mountains. I don't know, would you call them mountains? Not sure. There's also some nice verticality to it, so there's lots of nooks and crannies to look for, and on top of that, there are those structures inside the mountains I was talking about. They're guarded by Renin soldiers, and you can kill them now, and get the goodies in there now, or you can go to Mosgul straight away, and when you come back, they'll be gone. And that's, I think, follows through with most of the dungeons where there's enemies in front of it. And you can get the equipment now, which could be useful for the boss or whatever. Or you can come back later when it's not guarded, which, why would you ever do that? But it's an option, I suppose. The enemies in this area are just wolves, bees, armadillos, and the soldiers. But the soldiers did kind of kick my ass a little bit, so fair enough, I guess. But then we arrive in Mosgul, and I guess just kill these soldiers. This is very unclear. This is very JRPG, unclear whether you're killing people or not. I feel like we are, which really complicates things later, but that's not for right now. And of course, Iron Mask is fucking pissed.
mess with my friends, will you? You just crossed the wrong line!
People are dying and time is of the essence.
Am I too late?
Stop! Please, don't hurt the children.
What's that? Damn it, I can't reach them in time!
Get back, Cole!
Doc! Cole!
So after beating the second and only knight that's here for some reason, with 8 CP might I add, we get into a really heated debate with Doc. This is another kind of scene which undercuts the tension for a different reason, which is it's just generic back and forth shots, and each time you get to the next piece of dialogue you have to actively press it and it makes a little ch noise. I guess this debate topic gets pretty heavy for them, but it's hard to take seriously with the genericy, with how generic it looks. And even if the voice acting is like kind of crazy here, like Ray Chase is just going for it.
Lucky? You call people getting slaughtered like this lucky? I should wait for the right moment? But what's the point of waiting if others have to die so that we can live?
It's just kind of weird, and it feels like it goes through so many stages. This conversation just goes from bum 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 to where at the end Doc is like, oh, I've completely turned around on this.
This is how things go when you're a Danon slave. You're dead if you stand up to them. Keep your head down and do as you're told. At least then you have a chance to survive. What do you think happens when someone tries to resist? It'd be one thing if the rebel died, and that was that. But it never ends with only one death. You've seen it for yourself. Everyone suffers for it. Knowing that, are you really going to tell me our waiting has no meaning?
But that's... I understand not wanting to throw away the same lives we're trying to protect. That would be senseless. But if you wait too long, if you get too used to waiting, then eventually you lose the will to fight. I don't want that to happen to me. I've already met the Crimson Crows. People who risk their lives to fight the Renan's rule. People who know they might not live to see us win, but fight anyway to give those who come after a better chance. If my life is at risk either way, then I'd rather spend it fighting.
So you've decided to take up the sword?
Yes, but not just any sword. It's a sword that only I can wield, but one that's also too powerful to use on my own. I doubt those who fought the Renans in the past ever had something like this on their side. That's why I'm willing to bet everything I have on this sword. I know it might mean more people end up in danger, but...
Okay. If that's how you feel, then forget what I said. It's clear your time has come, Iron Mask. Currently, you and that sword are the only things capable of driving the Renans back. It's because of you that we're still alive right now. If there's a way through this for all of us, then I'll put my trust in you to find it.
Could we have maybe expanded on this a little bit? I feel like Doc is almost caught between being Iron Mask's dad and being a slave that represents the slave mentality. Because it starts with what I assume every other slave pretty much feels that isn't in the Crimson Crows. And it just goes into, at the end, well, I'm proud of you, Iron Mask. Like, you're really cool how you're taking up the sword and blah 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 blah. I want to be clear that this is good for establishing why the slaves aren't rising up generally. It's good for solidifying Iron Mask's beliefs. It even raises some interesting points for both sides, but the scene is just... it just doesn't hit right because of the way it's presented, and the fact that Doc is like this non-character we don't really care about. Like, he's only known Iron Mask for a year. It's not like he's his dad or something. And the sudden heel turn and the cliche like, oh, if anyone could do it, maybe you.
Maybe you have a chance after all.
It's just not good enough. I expect a little bit more, if I'm being honest. I mean, hell, what about Cole? Cole doesn't even matter anymore. That first scene, that was it. That was the only time Cole mattered. So yes, this is not a good start for the NPCs of this game, and for the most part, it doesn't really get that much better. I mean, it does get better, but not that much better. Other than, of course, our boy Zephyr, who we get back to, and we just have a random conversation about like, oh, would you recruit me even if I didn't have the blazing sword? You don't have the blazing sword, what are you talking about? Like, they say this as if they know how it works. He's only used it once. He's used it one time. You'd think we'd be a bit more torn up by the people who died in Mosgul, but whatever, this is more interesting. Zephyr even mentions another guy they lost that's kind of like Iron Mask, which I think is foreshadowing, but we end off reaffirming that Zephyr is going to be a mentor figure for Iron Mask.
You remind me of another guy we lost. Maybe deep down, trying to help you is a way of making amends for what I couldn't do for him. But if you don't want this, just say the word.
I'm not going anywhere. If it weren't for you, I wouldn't even be here.
If you say so. All right, come on in.
Thanks.
Right after that cutscene ends, we're thrust into a side quest, but it's more of a tutorial, so I don't know why it's pretending it's a side quest. Anyway, it just wants you to go in and make a weapon. Weapons cost materials that you get from killing enemies and whatnot, and gold, which you can get in a variety of ways, usually from selling certain items that can't be used for anything else. The blacksmith is found alongside the inn staff and the item seller inside of inns and towns. There's also another vendor which isn't unlocked yet. It's your standard RPG affair, you get the picture. Although to be clear, you can cook food before you go to sleep in the inn as well as camp, but you can't do the reminiscing or have any of the fun. Actually, that's the end of the sentence. You can't have any of the fun. Camps are just better in every way.
All right, everyone. It's time. Remember, eyes on the prize. We're after Balseph. Nothing else. Cut off the head, and the snake perishes. Hit them head on, however, and we won't make it through the castle gates, let alone reach Balseph himself. Luckily, we have an ace up our sleeve. We need to do everything in our power to make sure that ace reaches Balseph's jugular. To that end, I'll be splitting us up into separate forces.
You just said all of us hitting them head-on would be useless. Why would we divide ourselves up?
'Cause we're the decoys. We'll buy our ace in the hole the time they need to get in. We only need to cause enough of a ruckus around the castle to distract the enemy. That said, we need to look like the real deal, which is why I'll be tagging along too.
You too, Zephyr? So, who's going to take on Balseph?
The Iron Mask. I'm counting on you and Shion to make your way to wherever Balseph's hiding. Once there, you drive that flaming sword right through him.
You aren't seriously sending in just those two, are you? One of them's a Renin.
No one said the plan was perfect. By far, the biggest danger is the one you two will be facing. The fate of this quest rests entirely in your hands, which is why you get the final say. You want out? Now's the time to say so.
And if we say no?
Then you say no. Just means we're back to square one, that's all.
And I go back to being a slave.
It's your life.
No, it isn't.
Ball's in your court, soldier. What do you say?
I want to fight.
But for what? What are you fighting for?
To free the Danans from the yoke of their abusive oppressors. To no longer die at the whim of another. To break the shackles of our enslavers. To live and taste freedom!
Now you're talking. I believe we have our ace in the hole, people. Hold on to that belief, and we just might break through that wall yet. And what about you?
I was born ready. Now can we get this show on the road?
Now, I will say that the scene is very good with what it's given, but what it's given isn't that great. You could imagine this being a lot more epic in a different story, but it's the start of the game and there's all these like blank NPCs we don't give a shit about, and it's like, oh, we're gonna rebel. It's really not that impactful as it could be. Even the couple of NPCs we do know, the most notable of which being Zephyr, I'm still not that invested in these guys' struggle. It's really interesting how perfect the excuse for Zephyr not being there and for everyone to split up is, but it's just kind of weird. I mean, what if Balseph just came out front and just schooled everyone? Then there'd be some real deep shit. And there is such an unbelievable amount of trust in Zionne and the Blazing Sword, and the strength of the Blazing Sword to be able to fight the Fire Lord. Surely he would be resistant to fire? On top of that, we have all this dressing up of the struggle, and we're gonna rebel, and Iron Mask is like, yeah, these are my beliefs. And at the end, Zionne's just like, yeah, I'm ready, I'm here. She feels like an afterthought. She feels like she's barely here, she's just a Klingon in the story right now. If I was writing this, I would have had some sort of doubt from Nathan's like, well, we can't really trust a Renan. And what does Zephyr say?
No one said the plan was perfect.
Imagine if, instead of this, Zionne spoke up and was like, I'm gonna take down the Renan Lords because they're pieces of shit and I don't like them. Or something, technically that isn't what it is, but you could just say she hates Renan, considering her backstory later. Just have her say, I hate Renans, or I saw that they're enslaving you, or anything. You could have said, they attacked me, so they're my enemy? You could, anything at all, instead of, oh, no one said my plan was perfect. Or even just a reaffirmation of what she's already stated, saying, yes, don't worry guys, they're a stepping stone on my path to beat all the lords, or this is part of my goal. Where was that? She's just like, oh yeah, I'm always ready. This is actually a very big problem for Zionne in the first half of the game, where she sat here with all her secret motivations, and that's it, wait about 20 hours if you want some development. So yes, the pacing in this game, like most Tales games, is quite bad, including development of characters. But let's relax with a skit. One small step for Dana. This actually looks like the first example of a line read where the voice actor is not giving the correct direction. There are some really bad examples later, this one's not so bad.
Well, you're in pretty high spirits for a guy going into a life and death battle.
Why does she sound like she's smiling and not pissed at all when she's clearly supposed to be? And take a look at what Zionne says here that she could have said in the scene we just watched. All these Danan slaves know she's a key part of their plan, and it would have been nice to just have a reason for them to trust her. A little bit. Then this skit could have been cut pretty much entirely. I mean, there's a little bit of foreshadowing in it, but who cares? What about the main fucking story, bro? Quick side note, I actually do decide to try and fight the Mantis here and get owned. Because of that, I actually find out that if you die and have some CP, you won't revert back to the previous save. It doesn't really matter during boss fights, it'll just ask you to retry it again. That being said, I just save before every difficult fight anyway, and revert back to the save as to not lose any of my precious items. So I don't know what the point of this is unless, you know, you're one of those people who want to do everything the game's way, which I guess is fine. I also find a fishing spot through a loading screen in Kyrd Garrison that I initially ignored, but unfortunately I can't fish right now. So I guess it's time for the assault.
Zephyr and the Crimson Crows are supposed to be distracting the Renans from the front.
Then let's go around and sneak in elsewhere.
That's Zephyr from the Crimson Crows! Still up!
So we use the distraction to circle round to the back, and Alvin actually says something kind of interesting here.
Gates of fire sure look intimidating once you see them up close. We can't say this place is truly liberated until we do something about them.
As the game progresses, the conversation about walls and knocking them down and we'll never truly be free until we knock down all the walls, that stuff comes up a lot. So it's really interesting to see the seeds of that thought process in the main character this early on in the game in such a subtle way. Because before I was like, oh yeah, it's so blatant, like, oh, you knocked down the wall or whatever. But I really like how perfectly they set up the groundwork for that line of thinking later on. You're only going to catch that kind of comment when you're replaying the game. So to have the forethought to put that in really shows a lot of care, in my opinion.
Is this someone's idea of a bridge?
Looks like it. Don't follow her, this will be a pretty short story.
But now we're finally in the Lord's Castle. It's finally time for the climax of this region. And guess what else it's time for?
You should take the blazing sword.
It's time for the gameplay to fucking start, that's what it's time for. Hold on a minute though. This is important exposition.
The flames.
I took the liberty of cutting the flow of energy from the Master Core. I may be giving you the sword, but you still need me to unleash its power. Try not to forget that.
But now that we finally actually have the blazing sword, it's time for a skit. To be fair though, At Dawn's Length is quite a fun skit.
Where the hell is Balseph? If we don't hurry up and find him...
You're too close. Try to stay farther apart.
Oh, right. Sorry about that. Was I really that close?
I guess I'm just not used to standing right next to people.
You mean because of your thorns? You're a surprisingly nice person.
What?
You don't think so? I mean, you just made sure your thorns wouldn't...
You can keep your opinions to yourself. You don't know the first thing about me.
I'm not saying I know everything about you. Sheesh. No need to bite my head off.
You just can't take a hint, can you?
What? I'm sorry. You're right. I don't know what sorts of hardships you've been through. After all, what could I possibly know about pain?
I know you didn't mean anything bad by what you said. The throne room is up on the next floor. That's probably where we'll find Balseph.
But now that that skit's over, now it's time for another skit. Guess what it's called? Beating around the bush. You see, unlike the newer Tales games, where every battle or so, a skit will pop up, maybe there's 1, 2, 3, whatever the case, they'll be spaced out appropriately. Whereas in this game, they just dump them on you at the start of the dungeon. So if you watch them all at once, it's kind of a skit overload, and isn't paced very well. And if you don't watch them all immediately, and save them for later, you might miss them in the correct time in which you're supposed to watch them. You do have a chance to see them again at camp, but I want to see them at the right moment in the story. The dumbest part about this is that most of the skits imply that they've been in the dungeon for a while, or that, you know, this isn't the start of the dungeon, so why am I getting the skits at the start of the dungeon anyway? Like the last skit though, beating around the bush is actually a pretty fun skit. I might just let it play out.
Hey.
What?
If there's something you want to say, just come out and say it.
Huh?
I hate when I feel like people are laughing at me on the inside. Especially someone like you where I can't read your expression.
What? Why would I laugh at you? What are you talking about?
My outfit. As soon as you saw me in those ruins, you wanted to say something, didn't you?
Oh, it's not that. It's just...
Just what?
Nothing.
You're a truly awful person. You know that?
An awful... Hey, you're the one jumping to conclusions about what I think. You're not one to talk.
Then prove me wrong and tell me what you were really thinking.
It wasn't anything mean about you, I promise.
I don't believe that for a second.
And it doesn't matter what the hell I tell you. You'll always doubt me.
But now we can talk about the Flaming Sword and what the Flaming Sword actually does in gameplay. Essentially, whenever you use an art, you can hold down the button when you're done to use your Flaming Sword. Couldn't they have given this thing a real fucking name? These attacks are really cool looking and insanely powerful, so much so that they actually consume some of your HP when you're using it. As you progress through the game, you'll get more skills that are basically consume HP faster and consume more HP for more damage. You'll also get more moves, because unfortunately, when you start, you only have one move. Now, although there's way less Flaming Edge moves than there are arts, meaning there are multiple arts with the same Flaming Edge move attached to them, right now, we only have Swallow Blade. That is the only move we have that corresponds to a Flaming Edge attack. I didn't even like that move, so I took that move off and had to put it back on for this. I could go a bit deeper into the fact that the best strategy might just be consume all your HP all the time, but it's kind of hard to evaluate that at this stage in the game. Just know that the amount of HP you use is worth the damage you're dealing in most circumstances. And that using these attacks are very fun. They're very flashy, they're very bright, they look great. I just wish they weren't so minimalistic and gave us more than one move to start with. That would have been a bit more interesting. Gave us a bit of choice. The Flaming Sword also gives you the ability to do boost strikes, and what they are is when you stagger your opponent with a really good combo and get the little bar all the way around, then you can essentially finish them off. Although there are definitely some exceptions to this. Oh, and also...
This ends now!
Consider yourself finished!
flame!
This ends now!
Consider yourself finished!
There you are! You're finished!
Do it!
Still!
This ends now!
Consider yourself finished!
You'll be seeing this so fucking much. There are obviously more options later, but this is always here. Like, this is always a move that you could go to, and you will be seeing it a lot, even as we get more characters that we can do boost strike combinations with. The Blazing Sword also gives you the ability to get rid of some flames which are blocking your way. I definitely want to talk about this more later, so for now I'll just say it uses CP, and it can give you shortcuts or treasure or something of that nature. Overall though, the addition of the Flaming Edge moves and the stagger mechanic really add a lot to the gameplay, and by that I mean it stopped being boring. But hold on a minute, we've got another skit, and guess what it's about? Yep, it's about the Flaming Sword. It's called Unquenchable Flames, and it's actually pretty interesting. There's some foreshadowing here for Iron Mask, and it also talks about the logistics of actually using the sword and it burning his hands and Zionne having to heal him all the time. I guess it also highlights the symbolic nature of their relationship, but that's actually one of the weakest parts for me. If you made the Fire Master Core its own thing, instead of being literally inside Zionne, it would have made the, spoiler alert, romance a lot more natural in my opinion. Now onto the dungeon itself. Balseph's castle is okay. This feels like an appropriately simple dungeon for this stage in the game, but at the same time, it's a bit too simple. It's basically 4 circles stacked on top of each other with some offshoot rooms for treasure and stuff. Basically, you'll be on level 1, there'll be a stack of boxes in your way to the exit, and then you'll go all the way around the circle, going into rooms as you go by, and then you'll go upstairs to the next one, and then you pretty much just repeat that 3 more times. It works, it's serviceable, but it's not that good. Even then, it's probably the best Lord's Castle in the game, which is saying a lot. It being built into a mountain or whatever, with this big core in the middle, is very interesting, although I don't know how it works logistically. What is Balseph doing most of his day? Is he walking around in these rooms? All these places for his slaves or servants or whatever, what does he do? Does he just sit in his chambers all day? It's not as if he spends most of the day walking around Calaglia or something, otherwise we would have seen him, or he would have got jumped by Zephyrin and everyone else in the Crimson Crows. As for the enemies, this is basically the final dungeon of this region, even though it technically isn't. So it has a bunch of enemies we've already seen. The bees, the wolves, the armadillos, and the renin. Although an RPG with better enemy design would introduce a big enemy for a dungeon like this, and that's just not here. There is an Astral Flower Zoogle, but you're not going to be able to beat him at this level anyway, so what's really the point of him being there, other than having to backtrack for him later? Every time you see one of these guys, you're like, oh, maybe he's just a few levels above, so I can probably take him on. But you can't, he's like just another tier above that. Although saying that, I didn't actually try to fight him, because I thought it'd be level 40 or something, like the first one. Because they don't tell you what level they are. There's no indication of that whatsoever. But it didn't matter anyway, he would have just kicked my ass. Correction, retard. This gameplay you're seeing right now is me beating him on hard. Keep in mind, hard is 2 difficulties above normal, since there's moderate in between. Now, I certainly know the one after this you can beat pretty easily the first time you encounter him, but there are certainly some later in game which are not that way. But we should talk about them as we come across them. Obviously, since the armadillo was the first creature you came across, it's also the first real boss you can take down. Of these gigantic creatures, I guess. I still wouldn't consider this part of the dungeon though. Either way, when you beat him, you get a CP flower, which permanently increases your CP by 10. I think the thought process is to make the first few a little bit weaker, so you can actually take them down, and make the later ones a bit too much of a cut above you, until later. But that's a discussion for another video. Now halfway through, there's a cutscene with a little slave boy they find, and I just want you to watch this.
Thanks for saving me. Oh, here! You can have this! Don't touch me. I'm sorry. I only wanted to...
It's not your fault, kid. Don't sweat it. Can I take it instead?
Sure! It's the key to the elevator here. Will it help you guys at all?
Definitely. Thanks, kid. Now get going, and be careful on your way out. So, not too happy about a slave touching you, huh?
Excuse me? Is our main character a retard? At Thorn's Length was literally all about this.
You're too close. Try to stay farther apart.
Oh, right. Sorry about that. Was I really that close?
I guess I'm just not used to standing right next to people.
You mean because of your thorns?
What the fuck is going on in this scene? Look, I don't know whether this is on the writers or the localization, but somebody fucked up here. We could give 1,000 times benefit of the doubt and say that Iron Mask just assumed the worst of Zionne because she's a Renin. There is a scene like that later for another character, but Iron Mask doesn't really do that for Zionne. In fact, in the skit I just referenced, he calls her a nice person.
You're a surprisingly nice person.
What?
You don't think so? I mean, you just made sure your thorns wouldn't.
So I don't understand how this could make any sense on any level. Anyway, after that baffling scene, we get the Savage Key, and that gives us a title, emblem, or whatever, which finally gives Zionne access to her bombs. That's right, she has bombs too. To summarize Zionne and her playstyle, she's essentially a white mage crossed with a ranger, which sounds awesome, and it is. You essentially want her on your team all the time. She's the best healer in the game. She also does damage, she also takes care of flying enemies, and she can also debuff with the bombs, which isn't like, it's more of a gimmick. Her fighting style is a lot of shooting, you also have to reload, the bombs are a pain to use. This is definitely a character where it doesn't feel like the arts are fitted for a playstyle. It's definitely not a character you want to play yourself, you want the AI to play it. I do appreciate the option, nonetheless, and it is better than some of the other characters in the Tales games. But guess what we've got now? We just had a cutscene, so it's Skit City. This one's called Renin Values, and it feels like the game's trying to justify the really bland dungeon design, which is fair, but still doesn't really excuse it.
This place looks damn near the same on the outside as it does on the inside. Nothing but fire and rocks. I figured a Renin castle would at least be a little more elegant. Instead, it seems this one was very dedicated to a theme.
Is that your idea of a joke? Don't lump the rest of us in with someone like Balseph.
Then why's his place look so grungy?
I guess you could say that's just the majority of what he's into. He likes fire and he likes rocks.
This game seems to think that lampshading its issues will make them go away, and it does help, but it doesn't make them go away. Like, they're still there. And can we just highlight that this basically contradicts the previous scene?
Huh. Interesting.
Why?
I used to think all Renins were like him. Terrible people obsessed with their own superiority, who are only out to make us miserable. But now, listening to you talk makes me realize that maybe there are some good ones too. Maybe there are a few of you that are different.
Listen, I don't know what kind of Renin you think I am, but I have no intention of getting friendly with you. We clear?
Crystal, believe me, I wasn't about to suggest we go hang out and have a drink after this, that's for sure.
Oh, and let's not forget the trend of just making Balseph comedically evil. Something that, ironically enough, does get lampshaded later. I'm not joking about that, by the way. It happens 35 hours in or something, but it does happen. I had a lot to say about that one, but this one, not so much. The explosive healer is just about Zionne's gameplay style, and I do like how it ties in the story and the gameplay together like this. There's actually a name for this, ludonarrative cohesion, as opposed to ludonarrative dissonance, which I'm sure you've heard before. But yeah, there are a lot of small little things like this, and I do appreciate them a lot. And it's funny I should say that, because the last skit in this dungeon is right before the boss. And guess what it is? I mean, yes, it's some general exposition about him, because we have barely seen him up to this point, and whatever, but also, they give you tips how to actually beat the boss.
With sheer brawn like his, he can knock you out with one hit, and it's practically suicide to go up against him when he has a weapon.
Got it. Watch out for his attacks.
That's only the beginning. You can't expect to beat him by attrition. First, we dodge, then look for an opening. Remember that.
Sounds like our teamwork is really going to be put to the test.
I mean, really, the tip is just dodge, because he has a really powerful attack, but still, that's more than I could say for the enemies up to this point. And you know what that is? That's more cohesion. That good stuff. Now, since this is an important dungeon, you might have been thinking about the CP mechanic, and the fact that I might have run out of it by now, which I did. Well, not to worry, right before pretty much every boss in the game, there's a little health fountain thing that you can just click on and you get some health. This really plays into my opinion of the CP mechanic overall, but I really feel like they could have done better than just a random thing you click on. I know it would have made no sense to have an inn or something here, but there were some beds downstairs, like when you have a bed they can sleep in right before the boss room. I mean, I know why, it's because not all dungeons have beds in it somewhere. Really, I don't know what I would have wanted, but after all that talk of cohesion, this really kind of takes me out of it a little bit. But we finally meet Balseph, and oh my god, this lip sync.
In any case, this is the end for you. You won't be getting out of here alive.
Does that even fucking work in Japanese?
どちらにせよ貴様らはここで死ぬのだからな.
But if you're wondering if he says anything interesting in this cutscene, he doesn't. Just big tough bad guy posturing and all that. He's got an interesting crest though, and he knows how to swing an axe. As for his battle, this won't be a surprise to anyone, but he's a big slow guy with strong attacks. In particular, there's a big jumping axe attack, which was what the tip for dodging was for? At least I think it was, he's wide open after that. Honestly, the coolest thing about battles like this are the boost strike combo thingies. It's usually just a button press, but it looks good and it shakes things up. It also gets Balseph down for quite a while, so that's pretty good, but in that case, couldn't you just given him less health? Or just have the attack do a significant amount of damage? I do go down a few times because I keep falling for the same stupid attack, where he slams the hammer down and then swings it around. Like, how do I keep fucking that up? I even run out of CP at one point and have to use my life bottle. It was at least a good thing that when I got halfway I could use a boost attack, and that led into another cutscene. Balseph slams down his axe, which I just called a hammer, and breaks Iron Mask's mask. It's actually a really dumb name. But that's okay, because we can start calling him Alpha now, because it's pretty much been revealed. Probably could have called him Alpha the whole time, to be honest, but bit late in the recording for that revelation. We can actually see his face now, so he can actually show some emotions during the scenes where Ray Chase is just going nuts. Balseph retreats upstairs, and he starts whacking away Shion shots, which makes no sense at all, but it's anime. But things start going a little haywire when this fire avatar comes out, and Balseph's like, "Oh, that's not supposed to be happening, what's going on? That power is supposed to be for me, oh." So we're back in the fight. Balseph has half HP still, and there's also the fire avatar's health bar, even though you can't really fight him. Also, if you're thinking that something like this will happen for the other lords' fights, not really. You don't really stop halfway and do something interesting. It's just a full fight, which makes sense. I mean, a health bar is there for a reason. But still pretty disappointing after this. You don't even have anything crazy like the fire avatar, even though he's just kind of there throwing out attacks every now and again. He's not really that much of a threat. I would say him and his health bar being there is foreshadowing for later, and you do kind of fight him later, but not really. So overall, it's kind of wasted. The actual fight is pretty much the same, including me falling for the same attack over and over again. I die quite a few times actually, but I have enough life bottles. I was a lot better on the second playthrough. There's also another special boost strike that lets you take down the fire avatar, I think, for a time. Again, barely knew he was attacking me anyway. Once Balseph gets low enough on health, he starts powering up for a special attack by not moving, and I guess having more defense. Another kind of boring mechanic. It's used a lot better on the Lord after this one, but that's not the only time we see it. I guess I can understand it. You're trying to kill him as fast as possible so he doesn't do the attack, but I feel like that only works once, and only if it kills you straight up, which I'm pretty sure this one does not. Okay, I've come with some more information from my hard playthrough about this boss fight. I figured I would only bring it up if it was different enough, and it turns out it was. This is definitely one of those games where harder difficulty just means you take more damage and you deal less damage. Although, to be fair, I did catch some new moves, I think, and the volume of how many moves he uses is much higher, and the fire avatar too. One thing I didn't really realize about this boss fight the first time I played, and even the second time I played, because it was super easy then, is that the camera angle is so shit here. And it's always locked on Balseph, and he's jumping around and going to the center again. I don't know what the fuck is going on. I actually did die on both phases of the fight. Not too many times, but there was some bullshit going on. Just look at this. That fucking thing came out of nowhere. He almost got me the second time too. Then Balseph actually got his move off when he was on 1 HP, but he attacks in front of him, and I was behind him, so it didn't even matter, all that charge up for nothing. So yeah, it was quite a bit harder actually. I wouldn't really say it's much funner though, and I worry about later. I think moderate's probably going to be the best difficulty for a healthy challenge. Balseph starts getting on Shion's case for being a traitor, so it's probably the most interesting he's ever been, showing a big emphasis on loyalty. I guess it's foreshadowing for later, but it's so light that I wouldn't even really consider it. That Alphen knocks him into the fire avatar, essentially killing him. Then Alphen gets rid of him by absorbing him. So that was pretty easy. Makes sense he wouldn't have been able to do it before with Balseph attacking him. That's a huge amount of power he's got to get rid of though. So he throws it at the wall, of course, and he breaks the wall. Can you believe it?
Zephyr was right. We did it. We brought down the wall.
Iron Mask. Your face is exposed.
Bitch, are you blind?
No.
Huh?
I remember it now. My name. Alphen. My name is... Alphen!
And then the opening plays, and I'm actually gonna end this video there. I still have the conclusion to go, but I mean the content that I'm actually looking at. Because this isn't about Calaglia as a whole, this is about the Calaglia Arc in the plot. Otherwise, I would technically have to include the stuff you do later in the game, back in Calaglia. This is also kind of a special case, because the Calaglia Arc, as I would put it, I would say starts right after this opening ends. Whereas after the climax in the other regions, there's usually a winding down portion of that arc before you get into the new arc. But that's not the case here, probably because it's the first one, and it needs to establish the plot and the status quo and all that. Essentially, the next part of the game is setting up things for Calaglia, more so than it is tying up loose ends from Calaglia. With that in mind, what are my thoughts on the arc, the region, and the game so far? Well, despite all the things I was able to shit on, I still consider this a pretty strong start to the game. Although the simplistic tutorial-esque nature of the gameplay really drags it down for me. Currently I've played this once, not knowing if I was going to make a video, twice, making notes, and just the Balseph section on hard mode during the editing of this video. And even when you do get the flaming sword, there's still so few moves and stuff and characters really that it's just not that engaging. I think a big saving grace for the gameplay is the locations. For a region that's just mostly fire and rocks, there's a lot of variety and just nice looking places to walk around, really. It's fun to jump off things and squeeze through gaps in fences and going into little hidey holes in the mountain or inside a ruined house. The aesthetic of this region is really good and the dungeons are pretty well designed for the most part. Even still, it doesn't quite feel big enough. You don't really get that sense of scale like you would in a Final Fantasy game, for example. The main problem is there's really no indication that there's anything else to the region other than what you can get to currently. There's all this talk of all the slaves, but the only slaves that I've seen were in Mosgul. But there must be more, right? Other than that one kid in the castle, of course. I feel like all the regions have this problem though, where the sense of scale just isn't there. They imply that there's more going on, but there's no... you just can't see it. Or if I could see it, I certainly didn't feel it. Or there wasn't enough emphasis on it as there should have been. This is technically leaking into the next video, but even after Calaglia is liberated, there's really no difference at all. Other than the Renin are gone, and people are just walking around instead of working. We visit 2 settlements in this whole region. Unless you count the castle, which I don't. I will concede that this is a long game, with a lot of content, with a lot to get through, so they can't just have town after town after town. I just wanted a hint of it. I just wanted the game to make me feel the scale of the region, but it didn't do that for me. Moving on from the world, there is the side content. There are only a few owls and some really boring side quests, but I know the minimal side content is so that the game can push you along to the next region. So that's why there's no fishing right now, for example, even though there's just a fishing spot. And I would prefer more side content towards the end than towards the beginning, so that's fair enough, I think. We're just in more of a linear section right now, I suppose. As for the story, we only have a few characters, really, at this point. Alfin, Zionne, Zephyr, and Balseph. There's also the medic girl, the guy who gets zapped, and Nath, but if you couldn't tell by the fact that I could only remember Nath's name, he's the only one that matters, in my opinion. For the other generic NPCs that somewhat matter, there's also Doc and Cole, obviously, although Cole barely exists, to be frank. As far as the side characters go, I think Nath had a lot more potential to be doing a bit more. Potentially he could have had a lot more conflict with Zionne and have that something they work through, or he works through, under Zephyr's guidance. As for Doc, I don't think he should have caved so quickly when it came to Alfin. I think he should have been more skeptical and been like, oh, I don't really believe that you're going to be able to do it. And maybe Alfin could come back towards the end of the story, and then they could finally reconcile that difference and Doc can admit, hey, I was wrong. I think that would have been a lot more effective than what we got, which was just, oh, I guess I believed you, whatever. I'll just walk back everything I said. You seem kind of confident, I guess. You talk about this powerful sword I don't even see on you right now. All the other NPCs aren't worth talking about. I don't mind that they're there, or that they're rather generic. They do have roles that build up the world and the group of the Crimson Crows and all that. Even Cole has a purpose. I should mention though, that although I don't mind their roles being rather simplistic or generic, I don't think their look should be. All these fuckers other than Doc look like creator characters. At least give them a unique uniform or hairstyle, jeez. But back to the 4 main characters of this region. Balseph, you know my feelings on him. He could have been a lot better. I get the feeling that it's a creative choice to make them so simplistic and evil seeming for later, but don't make one that's so generic then. I think that Zephyr is set up pretty well for the next region, although again, it just feels like some missed potential with him. I just wish he'd been there for the Balseph fight in some way, because if you think about it, Balseph should be really strong. He's basically the brawn of the lords, and yet he gets taken down by a sword that he should be resistant to. Granted, maybe the implication is that he's not super skilled in arts because he's not that smart, so he mostly uses his axe, which is fair enough, but still, imagine if Alfin and Zionne had almost lost, maybe they get pushed off the building or something, and Zephyr has to come in and help. Maybe Balseph breaks the ground and they fall through and end up where Zephyr is, and Zephyr can help them finish him off. Obviously then the question is, what about the fire avatar? Maybe that's something that comes after? I mean, essentially they need the fire avatar to be able to break the wall down. Maybe they did try going down this road and thought, well, we can't really do that because they need to be on the roof, they need to be where the fire avatar is, and need to break down the wall because that's a big theme. But I still just can't shake the feeling that he should have been there, especially with him being the mentor and stepping up as mentor even further in the next arc. Even then though, I am pretty satisfied with how they establish his relationship with Alfin. And speaking of Alfin, you can really sense how much he changes from the beginning all the way to the end of this arc. If you know, that wasn't clear by him remembering his own name right after breaking down the first wall to freedom. That Zephyr's teaching skit I showed very early on really showed you a lot about where Alfin's headspace was at originally and how much it changes because of Zephyr. At the same time, you see that fire that's always been in him, and he's always been there, standing up for people and basically ready to fight, but having no opportunity to do so. So there being a pretty face in need of help really gave him the push he needed and the excuse to actually start fighting, really. Everything that gets thrown at him in this region really starts building on his character going forward during Cyslodia and afterwards, where he really starts picking up steam with his identity. After all, a big chunk of his identity is missing because of his memory loss, but the foundations for who he's becoming are already there. This results in him building his identity off essentially wanting to free everyone. Whether he realizes it or not, he basically becomes the perfect hero because his identity is formed around his ideals, which in turn were sculpted by Zephyr and his guidance. So overall, Alfin himself is probably the most engaging part of this game thus far, and that's obviously really good for a long game which has a big focus on story like a JRPG. My only qualms with his character so far is his relationship with Zionne. Obviously, there was that one scene that made no sense at all. Him trusting the blazing sword so much, and his overall weird relationship with Zionne. I do like how tenuous their relationship is at this point, but it still feels a little bit overly familiar and a bit too friendly. Now, obviously Alfin is physically attracted to her, and has some admiration for her knowledge and her abilities, but that's where it should have ended. He's way too caught up in being polite and his pleases and his thank yous and his sorries. He should be kind of racist, I think. And he should really start to accept Zionne when Zephyr basically cools him down, and when he contrasts himself with Rinwell, a character who is really racist, who is coming up in the next arc. And you wouldn't have to change Zionne's character at all for this, because she does not give a fuck right now. She could not care less about anything else other than her goal. She is all business. And that's good. We have some room for Alfin, for him to grow, and for us to learn about him and have him evolve and whatever. But I don't think anyone could disagree that Zionne isn't being written around right now for her to be able to exist in this arc. I can definitely see Alfin looking past the fact that she's a Renin because she's so attractive and strong and smart and all that. And of course Zephyr is very mature and not racist at all. But what about everybody else? This is probably the region where the Danans are seeing their Renin oppressors up close and personal. You would expect anyone outside of Zephyr's inner circle to be really racist, but barely anyone cares, and it's very strange. I will maybe accept that Zephyr has taught them well, but even Nath and the redhead were really hostile towards her when they first met. I just think that logic is bent a little bit too much into Zionne's favour. I'd say that on the surface, Zionne is set up pretty well with her thorns and her powers and her attitude, but once you start looking a little bit deeper, you start noticing how little you have to work with right now. Yes, the romantic stuff is kind of enjoyable, that's set up. The exposition about her and her motivations and her thorns are interesting, but I think there was a lot more work that could have been done to really establish what I should be feeling about her right now and where her character is supposed to be going. With that, we should have covered everything. Before we end, I think I will put up a list of the skits, whether they're fun or interesting, whether they're important or skippable, something you may want to look at if you're playing the game yourself and don't want to get too bogged down with how many skits there are. But yes, just to remind you one more time, I do really love this game. I enjoyed it a lot. I've enjoyed it so much I played it multiple times, and will play it more in the future. This game just has problems, like any game, especially ones with this kind of length. So if you watch this and think the game is actually pretty bad, don't. Go out and play the game and make your own judgment. There's quite a bit I've missed out or glossed over, and it's a lot easier to talk about bad things than it is good things, so you should definitely remember that walking away from this video. When will we do part 2, Cyslodia? I have no idea. This video took a couple months to make, and the next ones will be considerably longer, so any motivation is appreciated. Subbing, liking, commenting, they'd all go a long way. Is this it? Is this the end of the video? Am I done?